Hey, how dark can it get? They're looking to overturn Obergefell v. Hodges, and the president is basically declaring war on the people of our nation's capital. Curfews. Fucking curfews. What do homeless people do for curfews? They get thrown in jail, right? And then we have a carve-out in a certain amendment for slavery. I've said it before, I'll say it again. This is the elder generation in conservatism's last grasp at power, winding the clock back to the 40s. The good old days when they were kids. When white people held everything. When black folks couldn't even so much as glance as a white person without being persecuted. And the definition of white's changed a lot too, conveniently. If the last couple months weren't your indication, welcome to reality. I don't think it's crazy to say most people have reached a limit of what they can say, and of what they can do legally. Unfortunately, the next steps on this road are even darker. Rest assured, there will be civil unrest. There will have to be civil unrest. Because right now, the train has lost its brakes. And there's nothing but a gaping chasm waiting below. Hey, how dark can it get? They're looking to overturn Obergefell v. Hodges.
It's bigger than that, and Rosa Parks predicted all of this in an open letter that she wrote before she died, where she said if Clarence Thomas is appointed to the Supreme Court, he will make it his mission in life to overturn Griswold. And since then, it's all he talks about. When he wrote the decision on Dobbs overturning Roe v. Wade, he specifically said that the goal was to end the progeny of Griswold. What is the progeny of Griswold? Well, what is Griswold? Griswold is a Supreme Court decision from 1965 that made it legal for married couples to use contraceptives. And the argument that they made was that because of the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause, that means that individuals have a right to personal privacy. This is not something that's in the Constitution. It's established by case law by the Supreme Court in Griswold v. Connecticut. And a lot of cases build on this. So if you can take away this, you can take away a lot of stuff. And this is the hyperfixation of Clarence Thomas. This is in many ways a project going back half a century of the far right wanting to end Griswold and everything that came from Griswold. So what came from Griswold? We know Roe v. Wade, which I already mentioned, contraceptives for married couples, but also contraceptives for unmarried couples. Your access to using contraceptives, whether or not you're married, is based on this Griswold case. Roe v. Wade, obviously, which is now gone. Right to contraceptives for anyone who's over 16, which doesn't necessarily mean that, anyone who's over 16 should have them. It means that it's not a crime for them to have them, and you can't make it a crime for them to have them. You can't make it illegal to be gay. And here's the one that Clarence Thomas never talks about, which is also based on Griswold, Loving v. Virginia, which is the argument that you can't make it illegal for people of different races to get married or have relationships, because he is in an interracial marriage, so he always leaves this one out, but it's also based on Griswold. Also, Brown v. Board, which is not technically part of the progeny of Griswold, but it's another case that Rosa Parks predicted that Clarence Thomas would become hyperfixated on overturning, and this is the banning of racial segregation in schools, but also sort of everywhere. So she predicted that he would try to bring back racial segregation in schools.
Hey, good morning. Yeah. On September 13th, 1991, Rosa Parks wrote a letter to the Supreme Court letting them know how she felt about Clarence Thomas. I'll read it to you.
Here's the statement of Miss Rosa Parks on the nomination of Judge Clarence Thomas to the United States Supreme Court, September 13th, 1991. Without a doubt, Judge Thomas has achieved a remarkable success in his career, raising himself up from humble beginnings to the nomination of the highest court in the land. That is to his great credit, and I applaud him for it. Yet, I have to believe that his confirmation to the highest court in the land would not represent a step forward in the road to racial progress, but a U-turn on that road. The record and rhetoric of the man leaves me little confidence that his confirmation would in any way help address the profound racial problems and divisions that drag our country down. His statements on the Brown v. Board of Education case, on affirmative action, and even on the Roe v. Wade, to me indicates that he wants to push the clock back. African Americans, I believe, want to have confidence in the promise of the courts. We want to believe that they are a place that we can turn for the redress of the racial discrimination and many deprivations that are still clearly rampant in our country. The Supreme Court decision in the Brown v. Board of Education instilled in us that hope nearly 40 years ago, as did many others that subsequently followed. Yet much has changed in recent years. The Supreme Court now appears to be turning its back on the undeniable fact of discrimination and exclusion, ruling that anti-discrimination laws and remedies have gone too far. I believe that Judge Thomas will accelerate that trend and will be destructive for our nation. And she was right. She also lived long enough to sue Outkast for their song Rosa Parks. And in 2005, she won that case. And in October of that same year, she died.
Let's just be clear. Clarence Thomas was born in Pinpoint, Georgia. He is of the Gullah extraction. Yep. He didn't even speak English until he was 7 years old. He spoke the Geechee tongue and was so afraid to speak in front of white people because he was always told, don't speak Geechee in front of white people because it would embarrass you, that he almost never spoke at all. Mm-hmm. There was a nun, a white nun, whose largesse helped get him through school and get him those good grades. He has been assisted by white patrons, really his whole life, even now by very rich ones, as they fly him around the country. And to your very point, he seems to deeply resent all of the assistance he got, and he wants to make sure that nobody like him ever gets that kind of help again, because it helps his self-image so that he can lie to himself and fool himself and maybe hate himself a little less for having gotten help all along his path to the Supreme Court. And let's be clear, the most important thing to know about his confirmation, other than the fact that he's accused credibly of sexual misconduct, is the polling that got him over the line. And it was the polling that I very much remember. I was one of the few black folk who was against him. It was the polling that showed that about 7 in 10 black people supported his ascension to the seat once held by the great Thurgood Marshall, and he is not his equal. It was black people's support that got wavering members of that Judiciary Committee
Democrats,
and wavering senators.
They needed Democratic votes. It was a Democratic majority. That's why Joe Biden is in those hearings running. They needed the Democratic votes.
And it was only black people's support in those polls that got wavering Democrats to vote for him. And he has repaid black people with scorn ever since.